Appalachia. Everybody in the world has a reaction to that word. Makes folks think everything from beautiful mountaintop views, dangerous hillbillies running through the woods with a rifle in one hand and a jug of shine in the other, to trailer parks, drugs, and blame near everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch along the eastern U.S. from Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. Folks that live in these mountains have seen and endured enough things to have happened to them to make a preacher cuss. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in the Appalachian Mountains of Southwest Virginia. And I was raised there by folks who lived for generations right there in the heart of them old mountains. Come with me and we'll take a look at some of the odd, awful, or legendary things that happen within my beloved mountains, and we'll be traveling around a little bit to look through the eyes of an old Appalachian at some of the crazy that spread itself around outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 6 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. You know, we hillbillies have a few things that we're big on. One of them is the Word of God and our belief in it. That being said, while we have that belief, the way we interpret the Word tends to vary right smart. That would be up to and include everything from wearing pit vipers around like wardrobe accessories to going to blows over whether baptism means fully dunking underwater or if sprinkling's good enough. The reason we see that kind of contrast is because every now and again there comes along a piece of dog squeeze that's figured out that they can sell ice to Eskimos. But instead of tapping into the ice cube market to get rich, they decide to do something a little more personal, like take up the sword of Joshua and preach the word of God. The problem is, they take a few passages from the Bible, pervert the hell out of it, box it all up in a nice little package, and sell it to poor folks going to church praying for forgiveness and maybe a blessing. Next thing you know, you're being led around by the nose hair in a cult, all while convinced that the only way that you're going to be getting to heaven is to endure a constant mistreatment, and that's the only way they're going to make it that way. And for the leader of the cult, that's a real good thing. Today we're going to dive into a story that proves you can sell folks a bucket of steam if you put enough these and thous into the sales pitch. We're talking about Benjamin Franklin Purnell, though folks in the mountains knew him as Ben. Now, Ben was born in the foothills of Greenup, Kentucky, back in 1861. In them parts, most folks were busy trying to coax a decent corn crop out of almost pure rocks, but Ben realized early on that there was more money in coaxing the sense out of people's heads. He was a quintessential Appalachian charlatan, a man who could talk the skin off of a grape and leave it feeling grateful for the breeze. This is a story of a nutball cult that had everything from long hair, a private amusement park, a leader who claimed that he'd never die, but finally proved himself a liar in the most flagrant way he could possibly do it. So, pull up a stump, buckle up, and make yourself comfortable while I tell you about King Benjamin and the House of David. Now, as we all expected, Benjamin Purnell, well, he didn't start out as no king. He started out as a restless Kentucky boy with a beard that grew faster than any of his morals did. By the time he hit his 20s, he decided that physical labor was for suckers and didn't have the gift of gab. He met a woman named Mary Stollard, and they didn't just get married. They became a two-person traveling road show of religious barking moonbat doctrine. They joined up with a group called the Flying Rollers in Michigan while they were going through. Now, when a group calls themselves the Flying Rollers, you know you're about 3 steps away from somebody wearing snakes around, trying to build up a full-scale ark out of wood from a butter churn, while telling everybody who sees how crazy they are that they're going to be sorry one day. Now, Ben watched how the leaders of these groups operated. He saw that if you promised people eternal life and a seat at the big table upstairs, they'd hand you their life savings along with their clothes and pair of nice shoes to go with it just to be safe. Ben realized that he didn't want to be just a roller. He wanted to be the guy holding the keys to the kingdom. In other words, he was going to take them final 3 steps, put on snakes, build up an ark, and tell everybody else that they were going directly to hell. Do not pass go, do not collect $200 if they didn't join his cult. In 1903, Ben decided that he'd had him a revelation. I don't know if he saw it in a brush fire or in one of them lightning strikes that carve it into a rock or what, but after it happened, he walked around claiming that he was the 7th messenger that mentioned in the book of Revelation. Yeah, folks, he had him a pair, you might guess. Now, in the mountains, if a feller claims he's a messenger from God, let alone the 7th messenger, we usually ask him to prove it by predicting the rain or maybe causing it to rain or do something useful like that. But Ben didn't go back to Kentucky where his own hometown hillbillies would see through his cool line of shit. He done got above his raisins. He went to Benton Harbor, Michigan, and set up his own kingdom and called it the House of David. He told his followers, most of them simple, hard-working folks from the Appalachian Ridges, except from Greenup, Kentucky, of course, and some from the Midwest that he'd collected up during his evangelistic travels and separated them from their homes and families by telling them that they all were the lost tribes of Israel. He promised them they'd never taste death if they followed his Star of Bethlehem. Now, the rules were pretty simple. That is, if you're a fan of being miserable around the clock, 24/7, 365, there was no meat because nothing says holy like a permanent craving for a pork chop, a nice sirloin steak, or heck, even a piece of damn chicken. Of course, there was no shaving. The men had to grow their hair and beards long. By 1910, the House of David looked like a Sasquatch convention. Then there was the one that seemed to show up in all these wackadoodle cults. That would be celibacy. That was the gotcha, no hanky-panky for the followers. Husbands and wives even lived in separate quarters. Of course, as we all know, another thing goes with the cult system, that would be Ben had himself a special exception to that rule, and it involved a whole passel of very young women who were barely women at all and a well-locked door to boot. They all lived together in a big house that they called the Diamond House. Now, the Diamond House, if you ever wanted proof that Benjamin Purnell was part magician and part mountain fox, the house, it is, to the average tourist visiting Benton Harbor, the Diamond House was a marvel. King David had his followers mix crushed glass and silica into the concrete blocks before they set. When the sun hit the building, it didn't just shine, it threw off a glare that could blind a hawk. It looked like a heavenly place done been dropped right in the middle of Michigan. But inside the geometry got a lot more creative and a lot less holy. The Diamond House was designed to be a literal maze. Ben knew that when you're running a purification program with dozens of young women while preaching celibacy to their husbands, you need more than just a do not disturb sign. The house was full of double-walled corridors and false blocks and halls that were installed into the backs of wardrobes. And a girl could be led to a room, the door locked, and 5 minutes later she'd be in a completely different wing of the house without ever stepping into the hallway. It was a masterpiece of leg-hound engineering. Now, Ben's personal quarters were, of course, the crown jewel. He had a series of reception rooms where he'd meet with the girls. He told them that the Diamond House was a filter for their souls. He claimed that the very walls of the house were vibrating with a frequency that only he could tune into, and that by being near him, in his private chambers, of course, they were being scrubbed clean of their earthly sins. I reckon that'd be kind of like ultrasonic cleaning, wouldn't you think? In the mountains, we call that crooked chimney. It looks fine from outside, but it's just a funneling the smoke right back up into your lungs. Or in this case, I guess it'd be up one's hindquarters. Here's where the crazy really kicks up a notch, though. King Ben realized that Keeping a bunch of long-haired celibate vegetarians locked up in a big vibrating diamond house was costing him a right smart bit of the very booty that he'd conned folks out of when they signed it over to him to get into the pearly gates. Not to mention, they get a mite peckish when their pipes get backed up, if you know what I mean. So, he turned his cult into a sports franchise. The House of David started a professional baseball team, and to beat it all, they were actually pretty blame good. I mean, scary good. They traveled the country in their own buses, looking like a bunch of bearded prophets who could hit a fastball into the next county. They even invented night baseball, using portable lights just so they could squeeze more ticket money out of who they called the Gentiles. Now, like most cults, in their own minds, it was okay to rip off folks who already had a one-way seat on the Hell Express, I reckon. Now, they were like the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball. They didn't just play ball. They'd put on a whole blame circus act right before the game even started. Then they'd play actual major league teams, and by golly, they beat a good number of them. It was the ultimate Appalachian hoodwink. Now, Ben was using the Lord's work to run a sports empire that made him a multimillionaire while his followers were back home eating cold cabbage, peanuts, grapes, and praying for the world to just go ahead and end. Heck, I don't blame them. What else they got to look forward to? It sure ain't nothing else down here, is it? King Ben didn't stop at baseball, though. He built a private amusement park in Benton Harbor called Eden Springs. It had miniature trains, a zoo, and a theater. It was the Disneyland of cults. People from all over the Midwest would pay good money to see the holy people run the rides. Ben was the first man to realize that people would pay a premium to look at weirdos, especially if the weirdos were polite and have nice, long, clean beards. While his sheep worked 16-hour days for no pay and being thankful for it, Ben was living in the diamond house, because if you're going to be the seventh messenger, you got to have a house that looks like a disco ball, I reckon. Besides, he was busy vibrating the sins out of as many young women as he could get his hands on. Of course, we all know that there's going to come a day when the wheels come off and the holy train runs straight into a ditch. So, it came the part, where the Appalachian charlatan finally gets caught with his pants down and his pickle in the cookie jar, and matter of fact, several other jars he shouldn't have been poking it in. Despite preaching celibacy to everybody else, like we said, Ben was running his purification program in his bedroom right there in the mansion. He convinced God in heaven only knows how many young women that uniting with him was a religious requirement to ensure their salvation. He told them that as the seventh messenger, his body was holy, and that any interactions with him was basically a ride on Space Mountain that ended on Earth with an earth-shattering Shangri-La where you land right in heaven after that. In the mountains, we have a word for that. It's pretty simple and trims away all the BS. It's called liar. In the 1920s, the Virgin stories started leaking out. Former members had the gall to start suing King Ben, claiming that he'd turned the House of David into his own personal orgy house. I reckon a cool line of eating garbage scrapings, working 16 hours a day, playing baseball until you dropped, and going without any relations with your wife after signing over every penny of your worth, well, had wore pretty thin, I guess, on most folks. Ben did what any true holy man would do when the law comes knocking. Well, he ran for it. For 4 long years, the authorities searched the whole country. They checked his baseball team's buses. They checked the camps in the woods, which is where the baseball teams were expected to stay while on the road. Them Holiday Inns come with the price when it eat into the profits, and they can't have that. They couldn't find hiding a hair of the man nowhere. Meanwhile, Ben was living like a pampered mole right there inside the diamond house. He had a secret room hid behind a series of heavy mirrors and sliding panels. Think about the gall of that for a second. While the state of Michigan was spending thousands of dollars on a manhunt, Ben was sitting in a velvet chair 3 feet away from the investigators, probably sipping a glass of wine and laughing through his waist-length beard. His queens, who were the inner circle of women who helped run the scam, and I assume had their fair share of the vibrating, would bring him his vegetarian meals through a dumbwaiter system. It was hidden inside a decorative pillar in the Diamond House. When the police finally raided the Diamond House again in November 1926, they didn't find a shining King Benjamin. They found a trap door under a rug in a quiet corner of the mansion. When they hauled Ben out, he looked like a potato that had been left in the cellar too long. He was as gaunt as an albino lizard. His skin was the color of a wet mushroom, and he was shaking like a leaf in a hailstorm. The immortal messenger was a husk of what he was, and he was so weak that he couldn't even work up a fart. Now, the investigators found the secret tunnels that connected the Diamond House to the other dormitories. They found a signaling system Ben used to alert his guards if anybody was suspicious and was getting too close, and to let them know when he was done vibrating the sands out of one woman and it was time to bring him another one. The Diamond House wasn't a temple, it was a fortress and a fraud. Of course, as always with these things, the trial was a Class A certified circus. The state of Virginia and Michigan both had an interest in the case because so many of the victims were mountain girls recruited by being scouts. They sat there and testified to Ben's holy headboard rattle and tree climbing vibrating sin removal techniques. And the real secrets of the Diamond House finally came out during what became known as the trial of the 50 virgins. One by one, women who had escaped the cult described what happened in them shining rooms. Ben had a line of theological hogwash that he would make a used car salesman cry when he put it on. He told these girls, many of them barely 16 at the time, came from humble mountain families who trusted him, and that he was an immortal, and that his essence was the only thing that could save him from the coming apocalypse. He'd bring them into the Diamond House under the guise of clerical work. Once the door clicked shut, the Bible study turned into something a little bit different. If a girl resisted, he'd tell her that her rebellion was endangering the souls of her entire family. He used their own faith as a weapon to keep them quiet. He'd say, if you tell anybody, the seventh messenger will close the gates of Zion on your mother and father. That's another way of saying that the boogeyman's going to take your family's keys to heaven and they're going to be fried like a mess of catfish in a cauldron full of hot grease. The defense tried to claim that Ben was too sick to stand trial. He sat there in a wheelchair looking like he was already half turned to a pillar of salt. The court eventually ruled that the House of David was a nuisance and ordered Ben to be removed. But the biggest joke, Ben Purnell, the man who promised his followers that he'd never die, well, he up and dropped over from tuberculosis just a year later, 1927. His funeral was a final hoodwink. His followers refused to bury him for days, waiting for him to rise again. If anybody come around trying to take him for burial, they'd go to blows to stop him. Now, they sat around the corpse, probably expecting a miracle but any minute now, but all they got was a smell that not even a Star of Bethlehem could cover up. Eventually, they put him in a glass-topped casket in a mausoleum so they could keep an eye on him, just in case he decided to pull a fast one. Today, the House of David is mostly a memory of miniature trains and long-haired shortstops. But for the family of the Appalachian folk who gave Ben their lives, it's a cautionary tale. Ben Purnell was the ultimate mountain trickster. He took the deep-seated faith of the mountain folk and twisted it into a sparkling mansion and a baseball team. He proved that if you give a man a title and a long enough beard, he can dang near get away with murder, or at least a very profitable version of it. Right up until the minute nature reminds him that he's just another man made out of dust. After Ben died, the cult fractured into about a dozen different splinter groups. The Diamond House stood as a grim monument. Now, for years, people would walk by and swear they could see a bearded-faced man standing in the upper windows, still looking for a new virgin to vibrate the sins out of, I reckon. Now, the glass and the concrete eventually started to dull, and the miracle shine faded into a dusty grayish grit. It turns out that when you build a house on a foundation of lies, crushed glass, it might look pretty for a spell, but it won't hold the rain out forever. The house of David still exists in a tiny form today, but the diamond has long since, I guess, lost its luster. It remains a stark reminder to us all Appalachian folks, if a man tells you that his house is made of heaven, make sure you check the basement tunnels and make sure they ain't there before you ever walk through the front door. I hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, Rumble, or Spotify, throw us a like, and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you watch or listen. Come on over to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend Podcast group on Facebook where we talk Appalachian or anything else you want to talk about. And I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder, Mystery, or Legend. I will see you then.